Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks, and this week we're taking a look at my new 41-year-old Les Paul. Is it super real or is it super fake? Anyone who knows me may well know that I'm a bit of a burst fanatic, and by burst I of course here mean Gibson Sunburst Les Paul standards produced between 1958 and 1960. I'm not going to eulogise about them too much here today, but I've been very fortunate in recent years to play quite a lot of bursts, and not only has it totally rejuvenated my love for the Les Paul, but totally overhauled my understanding and appreciation of what a Les Paul is meant to sound like. I'm not the first person to use the phrase Telecaster on steroids. Now, unfortunately, like most of us, I'm not in a position to be looking to spend roughly $500,000 in some cases on an original burst. So I've kind of been passively on the lookout, I guess, for the last few years now for the next best thing. Played innumerable Gibson custom shops, various reissues, a few high-end replicas, and some modern alternatives. But to be honest, finding a guitar that ticks all of those boxes, not only in terms of feel and playability and accuracy to an original burst, but if I'm entirely honest, one that really looks the part as well, has proven no mean feat. Now rewind to 2019 and I stumbled across this picture on Instagram. It had just been posted by a well-known guitar refinisher here in the UK. It immediately caught my attention, not only for the subtle mix of grain and flame in that top, which is something I've kind of identified in all of my favourite bursts, but the colour that it had just been newly refinished in. Kind of honeyburst, I guess, in the loosest sense, but with a very definite hint of green that, again, I've seen in all of my favourite bursts. Took a screenshot, saved the post on Instagram and kind of mentally categorised it as my ideal top for a burst, without actually giving it too much thought as to what the guitar actually was. A lot of the guitars at that particular luthier post are early 50s conversion Les Paul, so gold tops that have been stripped and turned to burst specs that are either spoken for or just wildly out of my price range. So you can imagine my surprise a few weeks ago when I opened up Instagram and there was that exact guitar waiting at the top of my newsfeed with "for sale" written underneath it. Not only that, it was at a price which I could afford. A few emails back and forth between me and the seller and a price was agreed, and the next day the guitar was winging its way across the water to me. So what is it, and have I really bought a fake Les Paul? It depends on the definition of the word fake, I guess. In the sense that it incorrectly says Gibson and Les Paul on the headstock, yes, it's inauthentic, to use a buzzword. Ironically, in case you didn't catch my little subtle reference at the start of this video, it actually started life as a Greco Super Reel, an EGF 1200, made in 1980. Now rewind to the mid-70s and it's fairly well documented that Gibson were experiencing relatively dark days during their Norlin era. Also couple that with the fact that Gibsons were becoming increasingly hard to track down in Asia, led to a lot of what we now think of as lawsuit guitars. Greco had actually been producing Les Paul copies since the early 1970s, albeit not particularly accurate ones. However, in the mid to late 70s, Tokai got hold of not only a 59 burst, but some original blueprints, and designed the Les Paul Reborn. Pretty much the most accurate Les Paul kind of recreation or copy or clone, whatever you want to call it, that had been made to date. Needless to say, it wasn't long until Greco followed suit, and between late 1979 and mid-1982, the revered Super Reel series was manufactured. Now, oddly enough, Greco only made about 500 of these Les Paul Super Reels in just over a 2-year period, making them actually scarcer than the burst which they were trying to replicate. As I said, they were introduced in very late 79 and discontinued then in favour of the Mint collection in early 1982. And much like the original bursts, they were handmade. Greco didn't get CNC machines until mid-1982, using old-growth Honduran mahogany, Brazilian rosewood fretboards, long neck tenons, and of course the fabled Dry Z pickups, or Dry Z if I'm to persist with my Britishness. The Dry Zs these days fetch silly money in their own right and are universally thought of as one of the first attempts at recreating that classic PAF pickup. Dry Z pickups were manufactured by Maxon, a company name you may recognise from those early tube screamers, and despite there being some key fundamental differences in terms of their construction, I mean they're wax potted for a start, which the originals weren't, they do sound incredibly close to those original PAF pickups, patent applied for. It's one of the reasons they still command such a high price to this day, that and again their scarcity. Now unfortunately in my guitar only the original Dry Z remains in the neck, and at some point, relatively recently presumably, the bridge has been replaced by a Whiz pickup, which does sound great, although I can't say I might not experiment with a match pair at some point in the future. Now obviously at some point in the guitar's history it has been relieved of its original Greco and Super Reel logo, in place of a Gibson and a Les Paul logo. Now honestly this wasn't the deciding factor in me purchasing the guitar, it was just something which I imagine was very common to do to these Grecos during the course of their lifetime. After all, they have been around for the best part of nearly half a century. That said, given originality isn't really a factor in this guitar anymore, I've taken a few steps to try and improve its overall level of accuracy to an original burst. Notably some very important tonally minded modifications, such as Dead Mint Club pickup rings, a new pickguard and a new truss rod cover, again all in aid of accuracy to the kind of guitar it's trying to be. I should say all of those very kindly provided by Ed at Vintage Tone Factory. Check him out on Instagram, he's got a fantastic little studio and is a total Les Paul fanatic, much like myself. Also should say at some point I'm going to fit some new reproduction knobs, although one thing I have which is kind of found slightly frustrating about these Grecos is that the Japanese use their preferred metric system as opposed to imperial. This means kind of like-for-like swaps can be difficult, so for example, fitting those reproduction knobs is going to require some new pots to imperial measurements, much the same as my initial plan to kind of change out some bridge and tail pieces that has been somewhat thwarted, as again, like-for-like swaps can prove tricky. Either way, straight out the case, it's kind of vibe and feel and accuracy in a lot of ways to an original burst has proved really inspiring, and I'm keen to kind of make a couple of subtle changes going forward to see if I can make any subtle improvements. So what next? Have I scratched my burst itch? Honestly and truthfully, I don't know. I think so, and I really do hope so, but part of me honestly wonders whether I'll ever be truly happy without owning an original burst. Although without a drastic change of fortune in my future, I'm not the only one who just have to come to terms with the fact that that might not be very likely to happen. I mean, the culture of conversions is very much testament to that. So many 50s gold tops being stripped, routed out for humbuckers, and then sprayed as bursts, albeit with off-centre seams a lot of the time, is very much testament to the fact that so many of us, with bursts being out of the equation or out of reach, are happy to settle for the next best thing. Part of the magic and experience of playing a real Les Paul burst far transcends its capabilities as a guitar. You're playing a piece of musical history, an icon of rock and roll culture that very much helped shape the sound of modern music as we know it today, and you're never going to get that same sensation from a reissue or a replica, no matter how good it is as a guitar. It just won't happen. That said, obviously the Murphy Lab 59 Les Pauls, which have been such big news and big bucks recently, very much speak to the fact that that thirst for the burst is very much there and is never likely to be quenched, to be honest. So at least for the time being, I've got me a burst, albeit one built in Japan in 1980. As ever, I'm Chris Buck. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already. That's very important. And I shall see you next week for another episode. Cheers, guys. Take care. I'll see you soon.